Ooh, thanks for remembering, Anna.
I was just noticing it's unexpectedly sunny outside my
I
window.
I totally agree with that unexpectedly thing. They've been making it sound like the worst rain week ever. So
What
for
happened
sure.
yesterday at state office? It was strange. We all of a sudden had this like very hard rain against the window, and within we all turned and looked. We were in a meeting, and then this completely blue skies, like 5 minutes. It was such a strange, very Vermont weather moment.
That's so true. So my agenda was too long for the chat, so I'm going to split it up. So we're going to get started in a few minutes. I'm Sherry Carlson. I know all of you, but I'm from Let's Grow Kids, the Chief Programs Officer. And Anna Brulette is our BBF partner for ELD, and Don Rouse is our state partner for this group. And Jen Severance usually joins us as well, and she's, as we would say, on assignment this morning, so she's not here. Just going to review overall the entire agenda to get started. And if you just joined us, if you could add your name and your role in the chat, that would be great. We have as usual, a great and big agenda for ELD. So we're going to start with Don Rouse is going to give us an update on the CCDF state plan and sort of where that is and where there'll be opportunities for engagement. And then Aaron Roche from First Children's Finance is going to talk to us about the state of Vermont childcare businesses in Vermont survey they did recently and some other project updates around the work that First Children's Finance is doing in the state. And then we have some updates from Child Trends. They were here a few months ago, and so they're going to join us and share some updates. And we're going to start for a small portion of the meeting, the work on the ELD policy recommendations that we want to make to the State Advisory Council for the 2025 legislative session. And I also just want to note that we added a meeting in June. We are not going to meet in July, but we added a meeting in June 27th, 10 to 11:30 to really focus on the ELD policy recommendations that we want to make to the Building Bright Future State Advisory Council. I think Anna will send an invite to that today or tomorrow. We didn't want to send it out and have you wonder what we're doing. So there will be no July meeting, but we will have 2 meetings in June. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Don Rouse.
Thanks, Sherry. So I just wanted to sort of preview something that will be coming your way quite soon. It's the CCDF, the Child Care Development Fund state plan. Every 2 years, we submit a new version of the state plan. The state plan for CCDF is where the CCFAP money comes through, as well as blended with state funds, and the quality dollars that are the set-asides from the CCDF plan. So every 2 years, you see a version of this. It's coming. We got it. The preprint was not available from OCC until late March, mid-March. And so we've been furiously writing it as a team at CDD. It's currently with Janet for almost final review. She's going to read through it and send it back with any edits that need to be made. The team will make them as needed, and then we are going to post it for public comment by May 22nd. It will be on our website. We will send another communication out late yesterday afternoon. A communication went out on our blog mailing list to say it's almost ready. Here are some important points of information. One being when the public hearings are going to be held, which is Tuesday, May 28th. We're going to do 2 sessions, one at 10 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. to accommodate various schedules. And then we're going to have written comments open as well, simultaneously through the whole process, and they'll be accepted through June 7th. We need to submit the plan by July 1. So we're working in this really compressed time frame for writing and public comments. So just be on the lookout. I had hoped originally that I would be ready to give you sort of a rundown of any points of variation for the plan, but unfortunately, it's a very big document, and we each have I think there's 10 sections that are quite robust in being written. So I just wanted to let you know it's on its way and to be on the lookout. Does anyone have any questions about, I feel like I've looked at the CCDF plan quite a bit in the last 2 weeks.
John, do you, so maybe you'll have another short update at the June meeting?
Yeah, I hope to. Well, and then, the public comments need to be addressed. So I'll at least have some information about any public comments we've had up to that point and any changes or edits we've made in response to those public comments. I'm also hoping to have the initial survey results coming back from Readiness. My data person has promised me she will have assembled at least a somewhat able to be made sense of assembly of information. So I hope to at least have some points of data from that at the same meeting.
Great.
If everything goes well.
Yes, I know. Thanks, Don.
Of course.
Does anyone have questions for Don before we turn it over to Aaron, or any questions in general about the agenda? It's in 2 parts because it was too long to put in one message, so. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Aaron. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Sherry. Thanks for having me here. And I am really excited to talk to you a little bit about what the state of Vermont's childcare business. We, First Children's Finance, did a survey. It's an annual survey. We did it the first time in Vermont in late February, early March 2023. We repeated the survey with some different questions, some similar questions, some same questions in March 2024. And I'll also say right up front that normally I love a good participatory presentation. And I spent a lot of time, there were a lot of questions in this survey. I spent a lot of time over the last week trying to compress this into a manageable length of data slides, and but also not wanting to cut out things that I think people really want to hear about. So if I could ask you all to either put questions in the chat or hold them till the end, that will ensure that I can just show you all the data and then we can dig back into whatever we have time to dig back into. I am happy to do follow-up presentations with anybody here, any organization that's interested. And we will be doing a public webinar next week on Tuesday. We've just started sending invitations to that out. Some of you may have received invitations, and that'll be recorded and put on our website as soon as we can. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to see more data, to get more questions answered if we don't get time for all of that. And then the last thing I'll say before I share my screen is thank you to all of the partners who helped us to promote this, especially thanks to Anna and Dora at Building Bright Futures that really helped me think through some of this data and keep it sort of top of mind as I was, right, my work is, I have a lot going on. And so they were really helpful in helping me stay focused on this. So big thank you to them at BBF for helping me stay focused. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And okay. I didn't put this in slideshow view because I feel like when I do that, it often like, I don't know, does something wacky. So we're gonna go through this. Sherry also invited me to talk a little bit about some of the work that First Children's Finance has been doing this past year, and the work that we expect to do in the coming year. So, so I'm taking some liberties and talking a little bit about that as I talk about these survey results. Okay, so here we are today. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about First Children's Finance, what we do, just in case anybody doesn't know that at this point. First, I'll say we have been in Vermont for just over a year. I opened the office February 1st, 2023. And we now have, well, starting next Monday, there will be 6 of us. We're super excited about that. We've grown from 1 person just over a year ago to 6 people as of now. Our mission is to increase the supply and business sustainability of excellent childcare. In Vermont, we do that primarily by working with childcare businesses. Later this year, you will see some sort of diversification in our services as we start to engage more with communities and not just individual businesses. So that's kind of exciting, but that's kind of what we do in Vermont. What we do to support individual businesses, we divide up into these 3 categories: professional development, trainings, webinars, cohorts, that sort of thing. We also provide consulting and technical assistance. That's on a one-on-one basis. People can email us with questions. If it's a simple question, we can just answer it. If it's a more complicated question or is something that might take more time to resolve or sort of back and forth work together, we are happy to set up a business consultation, which might take several months, and it might be work for us and work for the business that we're supporting. And we try to define an actual outcome, a goal of what that consultation will look like. I want to just say out loud that all of those things we do at no charge to those childcare businesses. And we do that in Vermont because we have a contract with the state of Vermont to provide those services. And so that is what we do. And in other states, it's funded by the state or by philanthropy or even some federal projects. So we are here, we will be here forever, and we will continue to offer those services at no charge to childcare businesses also forever. Lastly, I'll mention that we provide access to capital. This year, we've done that through the Infant and Toddler Capacity Grant Program, also a state program. In the next fiscal year, we'll be rolling out our loan program in Vermont I expect in the fall, and as well as some other grant programs and sort of small financial assistance coupled with some of our other services. So just to give you the idea, this is what we do in Vermont. And the team of 6 of us do this for all the childcare businesses in the state that are interested in working with us. So what did we do this past year? Just a quick roll up. You know, I love my numbers and I love storytelling through numbers. So I'll just say we had 244 participants in 26 trainings over the course of a year. Our first trainings rolled out in late April 2023. So this really was a year. We had 59 people participate in business leadership cohorts over that year. We conducted 2023 and a 2024 annual survey, as well as a flood relief survey. We took on 7 business consulting clients, most, maybe all of which we continue to work with. We awarded just about $1.9 million in grants to 62 childcare businesses, that is soon going to be 64. All those funds have to be spent by the end of June. We have kind of crashed through this money, and I have a phenomenal team that has been super committed to moving as much money out the door in a really responsible way. Anyway, I'm happy to talk forever about that, but we're really proud of the work that we've done in this first year. So anyway, that's who we are. That's what we've been doing this year. Without further ado, I'm going to get on to the results of the survey. Okay, so the quick background, because I know that there will be questions if I don't put this, and I want you to have this in your minds as we go through this data. So this survey surveyed 11% of the regulated programs in Vermont. I use the regulated programs number as of the end of December 2023 to do these calculations. Just FYI, and you can see the breakdown of after-school only programs, center-based programs, and family childcare, which is how I've presented the analysis here. In most cases, I've combined the after-school and centers just because there's only 5 after-school respondents, and they tend to act more like childcare centers than like family childcare. So, so they're in there. And then you can see the breakdown county by county, and you can see the percentage of each county based on the number of regulated programs there were at the end of 2023. The last thing I should mention, I will share these slides with Sherry after this meeting, and she can share them with everyone here. So, so you will have time to digest these more fully if you should care to. A little bit more about who completed the survey. So demographic wise, 5% of the respondents identified as something other than white or Caucasian, they were Hispanic, Native American, or 2 or more races. 1% of the respondents, so one person said that they prefer Spanish for their language, and 2% identified as male. 49% of the respondents are family childcare programs, 46% were licensed centers, and 5% were after school only. We saw that on the previous slide. 30% of them were either in Chittenden or Addison County. 52% own their building or their home, wherever their business is located. 32%, 1/3 of them have been in business for 31 or more years. That is important, and you'll see that reflected in some of the other data and trends that we talk about. On the other hand, 28% said that they opened in the past 5 years. So it's a real interesting kind of split of we have brand new programs and we have programs that have been really around forever. And 66% of those who responded to the survey said that there are for-profit businesses. That includes all registered family childcares, which can't really be nonprofits. So yeah, so that's a little bit about who did the survey. Next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to talk fast because it's a lot of bullet points and you can read, but I'm going to give you the overall conclusions from the data right up front, because I know that can be helpful in sort of grounding how you look at the data as you go through. So I promise there will be data to support these conclusions as we go through this. So in general, I conclude from this data that Vermont childcare businesses are generally more optimistic, but they're still concerned than they were this time a year ago. Family childcares seem to be more stable and more optimistic for the future that we surveyed, right? A lot of family childcares have closed up shop, but the ones that remain seem more optimistic than the centers and than they were last year. Costs appear to be stabilizing and fewer have deferred maintenance. But then I note at the very end that costs of childcare increased in 2022 and 2023, especially the cost of space and staffing. Hiring and cost of compensation remain the single biggest challenge to business stability. Uncertainty and disbelief remain around the impact of Act 76 and its eligibility increases, right, which hadn't been rolled out at all, well, or very minimally by the time we did this survey, right? The first big change in eligibility happened in April, and this survey was done in March. And also, I wanted to make sure to note, we didn't specifically ask questions about universal pre-K, but a number of people specifically expressed concerns about the future of universal pre-K. So those are my very high level conclusions from this data. And now I'm going to walk you through it. All right, the first few slides, 3 of them, are about business sustainability. So first of all, this question, and throughout this presentation, these light blue bars are always the 2024 family child cares, and the light orange bars are always the centers and after school. So you can see here that, not surprisingly, centers expect or are more likely to expect to be in business indefinitely. That makes sense. Family child cares are operated out of people's homes. So it's a little harder to imagine doing that forever. You can also see that there is a high percentage of both family child care and centers who are uncertain about how long they will stay in business. And this uncertainty comes up actually in the next slide, and it also comes up kind of throughout these slides, that they're still waiting to see how Act 76 really plays out for them. And so I think that's worth noting. The other thing I noted in that big blue box there is that last year when we did this survey, we asked not precisely the same question, but very similar question. And in that survey, 17% said they didn't expect to stay in business more than 12 months. And that's really important, right? This was a time at the end of February 2023. ARPA stabilization grants were just ending. There was, I was going to say, a lot of uncertainty. It wasn't even uncertainty. No one really had an expectation of how they were going. They didn't see a path forward. So 17% said they didn't expect to be in business by the time we did this survey again. And I'll show you in a second that didn't quite materialize in that way. And right now we see that overall 5% say that they expect to stay in business less than 2 years, so we've reframed the question, but that's a big difference. And I also, the number who said indefinitely also increased. And so this feels like there's that sort of glimmer of optimism that I mentioned in my conclusions. All right, the other thing I want to show you, we did this survey in several other states. The only other one who's finalized their data is Minnesota at this point. So in a couple of places, I did some comparison, Vermont data to Minnesota data, because I thought it would be helpful to put this in context. So this is that same question, indefinitely 3 to 10 years, 1 to 2 years, or unsure. The top bar are Vermont's family child cares, and the next bar is Minnesota's family child cares. So you can see the difference in how many family child carers in Vermont said they expected to stay in business indefinitely compared to Minnesota. And you can also see how many of them said 3 to 10 years or 1 to 2 years, and then unsure. And then you can also see Vermont centers and Minnesota centers. Interesting, Minnesota centers, more of them said that they plan to be in business, or a higher percentage of them plan to be in business indefinitely. But this was really interesting, this uncertainty piece. And I think it's interesting because I think it reflects that uncertainty of these center directors. They haven't seen this eligibility change. They haven't seen whether it means they're going to get those higher reimbursements. And in that same moment, there was a rate cap on how they could increase tuition. And so in the moment that we did this survey, they really were unsure because honestly, they were a little bit in disbelief that these changes would fully be implemented. And so I think that's worth noting. Whereas the family child cares, their rate increases, those reimbursement rate increased. Their experience was because many of them were lower rated, like lower stars ratings for family child care than for centers. We think that more of them experienced those rate increases since last July, right? Where we moved everybody to that 5-star rate in July and then gave everybody another increase in January. And family child cares will see one more increase in this coming July. So that might be driving some of this. All right. The third slide in this business sustainability section actually comes from data from the state. This is not from our survey. I want to be really clear. And I have a note here at the bottom to remind us of that. This is the number of regulated programs each quarter since March 2023. So it's a year of data. Well, I guess it's a year and a quarter of data, right? But so I thought this was really helpful. So the green bar are the centers, the blue bar is registered family child cares, and the orange bar is after school programs. And the reason I put this here and why I'm making a kind of a big deal about it is that on that earlier slide, when 17% said that they didn't think they could stay in business for another year, you can see we did not experience a 17% decline in the number of programs. And we can't fully attribute that to Act 76, but I definitely think it had to have had an impact because the numbers just don't reflect that. And the second point I want to make here is that in March 2023, there were 502 centers, and right now, the end of March 2024, there were 503. This is the first time in a while we have seen these numbers tick up, and like one program is not a trend for sure, but we're only down one in after school programs where we had been down several, and family child care ticked up for the first time, and I don't actually know for how long, right? A long time. So I felt like when I talk about optimism, I'm talking about people who are willing to start new businesses. And for the first time, we're seeing this like slight tick up in the number of programs. And I just think that's really important to note here. Not survey data, but actual administrative data from the state. Okay, I won't dwell too long. So now back to the survey data. So I have a few slides about enrollment and other sources of revenue. So this is sort of like the income side of the balance sheet. Couple of interesting things here. Let me just point out, this is not Minnesota and Vermont. This is 2023 Vermont and 2024 Vermont, right? So this is last year, this year, last year, this year. Really, I think important to note, I did copy this format from the Minnesota presentation because I thought it was really helpful visually. The percent who said their enrollment decreased that year, right? Over here, it's like 50% of family child cares that we surveyed a year ago said that their enrollment had decreased in the previous year, which kind of goes counter to this narrative of we don't have enough childcare spaces. Family child cares seeing enrollment decrease. Same with centers, a little lower, 40%, but same sort of trend. Whereas in 2023, only 15% of family child cares and only 22% of centers said that they experienced decreases in enrollment. This is it's important in a lot of ways. It's really important because this is their primary source of revenue. And so if they're looking at decreasing enrollment at a time where their costs are going up, you can maybe understand why they're feeling a little financially stressed. we tend to focus more on like enrollment increases because we know that there's not enough childcare out there. But I felt like looking at those decreases in enrollment was a really useful and kind of unexpected, right, in the narrative, I thought. So, oh, one more thing, sorry. In these boxes on the side here are quotes from childcare businesses that did the survey that I thought were relevant and thought-provoking, and somewhat reflect the general comments that we were hearing. So I just wanted everyone to have a chance to look at those comments. Okay, so the next two slides are also about enrollment. This one is just childcare centers. So there's a lot here. It's a little complicated. I'll talk through it. So the blue bar, the blue part of the bar represents how many children at each age group these centers said they had enrolled altogether. This is cumulative. The green segment, the top, like, represents what their licensed capacity is. This is self-reported licensed capacity, but we did phrase it that way. So we expect it's probably pretty true. And then the point at which the orange line appears here is what they told us their desired capacity is within each age group. So you can see, for example, this is not surprising. We tell people to plan on enrolling 10% less than your capacity, right? Because you're going to have kids leaving, kids signing up, you're going to have some gaps. You might want to have smaller classes than your license allows you to have. So it's not surprising to see a little bit of green at the top, and we don't expect that to ever get filled, right? You'll also see that for these centers, right, their enrolled capacity and their desired capacity are basically the same, except here, where they have more preschoolers enrolled than they say they want. And this is a cumulative number. So some programs might have less and some programs might have more. This is the sum of all programs. But interesting here that centers and after school programs, because remember we combine them in these, reported that what they have enrolled is not what they would like to see. That's kind of interesting, I think. I'm not going to offer any real interpretation there. I think it's interesting. But in general, infants and toddlers, no surprises that they are fully enrolled. They don't have any more room. So then family childcare. Also interesting, and note this quote here, which I found compelling. Again, we see for infants and toddlers, family childcares have maybe a little bit more than they wish they had. Even for school, no, let me back up. Infants and toddlers, they would take another infant or another toddler overall and another school age kid. And honestly, this is a little weird, and I'll explain why this is. Well, anyway, I'll explain that in a second. So, right, this is the blue is what they have enrolled. The green is what they're allowed to have enrolled. The orange is what they wish they had enrolled. So you can see that there is actually a little bit of space at just about every age group in family childcares. So I think that's really helpful to note. This preschool one, there is an outlier who described their desired enrollment as something more like a center. So I don't know whether they had ambitions and they would like to be bigger or what. And I almost took them out because I felt like this was a little confusing, but I also felt like taking them out was maybe disrespectful, right? Like, I don't think it was a mistake. I don't think it was a typo. So, so I left that in. I thought that was an interesting note. Anyway, all right. So that's what I got for enrollment. And the last slide here is other ways that childcares might be increasing revenue or income. So a little bit about whether they got stabilization grants, whether they got retention bonuses, readiness payments, the percentage that increased their tuition rates last year, the percentage that received some kind of grant, which included those Make Way for Kids capacity grants. It included the Building Bright Futures grants, all those USDA rural development, Northern Borders, anything else you could think of. Percentage that accessed high interest financing like credit cards or payday loans. Not surprising. Family childcare, a little bit higher percentage. We're glad it's not higher. And interesting note that like 12% of centers said they opened a new classroom last year. So that's kind of exciting. All right. And then one last thing, because I know tuition and tuition rate caps have been on a lot of people's minds. So I thought this was useful. So like the previous slide said, last year, 41% of family childcare homes raised their tuition. 78% of centers raised their tuition last year. And we asked them in 2024 if they plan to raise their tuition. And this is my pie chart of what they said. So about a third of family childcare said that they plan to raise their tuition as much as they were allowed to. We said up to 7.2% because that's what the rate cap has been this year. But only about a quarter of centers plan to raise tuition this year as much as they're allowed. Nearly half of them said they were going to raise it a little bit. So I thought this was helpful to sort of understand. And I think when you take these two things together, right, family childcares, fewer of them raised tuition last year, but more of them plan to raise tuition this year. Whereas centers, more of them raised tuition last year, fewer of them plan to raise tuition this year. Anyway, so for what that's worth. All right, moving on. Expenses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about expenses on space and other expenses. I'm going to talk about hiring and staffing expenses. I'm also going to talk very briefly about insurance. Couple of takeaways. More people are on time with their rent or mortgage than last year. It was even last year, it was very small amount. Remember the light blue are family childcare this year. The darker blue is family childcare last year. In this case, I don't know why I used green, but I used green. Those are centers this year, and then the darker ones are centers last year. So virtually everyone is paying their rent and mortgage on time, and virtually everyone is paying their other bills on time. This is amazing. It feels like we are set up for 2024 to be a really good year. Let's see, they still have deferred maintenance. That's still a problem. It feels like maybe it's maybe family childcare is putting some of these higher rates to good use, taking care of some of that deferred maintenance. And a little less of them report that their own household income was impacted by childcare business losses. So that's good news. All right, I'm going to move to insurance. So we asked them because we've heard that insurance is challenging. Sometimes, like general liability insurance is sometimes challenging in the childcare industry. And we've also heard about the sexual abuse and molestation insurance becoming more difficult, or like the requirements becoming bigger, higher. So we asked these two general questions about insurance. And this is one place where the difference between centers and family childcares is really, really notable. Right here, 40% of family childcare said it is difficult, or it's very difficult or somewhat difficult to get insurance. And only like 12% of centers said that. And then the companion question, are you concerned about getting liability insurance? Again, more of the centers said they're not concerned at all. And while more of the family childcares are concerned about losing coverage, and they're concerned about not being able to get adequate coverage. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's certainly not everyone, and it is certainly, it's only a third even of the family childcares. But when taken in with this quote here, I think it's useful to know, right? Not everybody is a pre-K partner. So I think that this is kind of paints it as a real challenge. So I just wanted to present that. Now we move into the, hiring. No surprise, hiring is really hard. So we don't need to dwell on that, but I did want to note that this year when we did the question, 80% said hiring is difficult compared to 96% a year ago. So that feels like a little bit of progress. But not a lot of progress. And that's why I say staffing is still kind of the #1 vulnerability in this industry right now. So these are some things that people did in 2023 to help them hire and retain staffing. The dark blue bar is benefits that they added in 2023 last year. And the green bar are just the things that they did offer, the percentage of people who offered those things. Yeah. I don't think there's anything super surprising. We know that Act 76 has been really helpful in terms of helping increase wages and other compensation. So there's that. And then the last part about expenses, we asked them some questions about ways that they have managed their expenses, things that they've done to either reduce expenses or sort of plan for future expenses, right? And this, to me, the single most exciting thing on this slide is that 1 in 5 family childcare said that they added money to their savings or retirement. And maybe the second most exciting thing is that 10% of centers said that they added to their business emergency fund. So again, that just feels like a little bit of progress. This is a very long quote, but I think it's worth taking a second. And I think this quote really speaks to that uncertainty that people are feeling in this moment of like costs have gone up for 2 years, and they're not quite sure about families being able to afford their tuition. They're not quite sure what financial assistance is going to look like. And that makes them uncertain about their future. Okay, couple more, bear with me. Here we go. This year we added some questions about their perceptions. And we also asked them what it would take to help their business be financially sustainable. So some of the quotes that you've been reading are their kind of open-ended responses to that question about what do you need to be financially sustainable. But this slide, we asked them these statements, and there were a couple of more statements, but I couldn't fit them all on the slide. We asked them a series of questions, or statements, and we asked them how much they agree with them. And when I first looked at our results, I was like, oh, they're not as happy as I thought they would be. But then I compared it to the results in Minnesota. So the Vermont results are the light blue 2 bars, or the light colored bars. And the Minnesota results are the darker colored bars. And I thought this was fascinating. So almost uniformly, we see that programs in Vermont believe that the state is making more investment, or is making investments in the system one way or another. One thing that's really interesting is the state is investing in childcare facilities. Minnesota actually has a facilities grant program that they've had for 3 years. So I thought this was interesting that so many more of a higher percentage of our programs said that they believe Vermont is investing in childcare facilities compared to Minnesota. More of us are optimistic about our future than programs in Minnesota. More of us think that compensation for childcare workers is improving, especially in family childcare. But it's not all settled, and I don't want to make it seem like I am super rosy and optimistic. The childcare sector is in crisis. 90% of both family childcarers and centers said they agree or strongly agree that the childcare sector is in crisis. And that's actually a higher percentage than centers and family childcare in Minnesota. So that was really interesting, right? That at the same time they believe that the state is making good investments, they also really believe that the sector is in crisis. I wanted to make sure I called that out because I think it's important. And that also this quote, again, I think is really telling about sort of the uncertainty and the sort of, yes, the state's making investments, but it doesn't actually, it isn't actually sort of rising all boats at the same time. So I thought useful to keep in mind. And then, so the dark blue was last year, the green bar is this year. These were open-ended questions that I coded. We asked what would help keep your business financially viable in 2024. Last year, more than half of the people said, I need more money, right? This year, only about a quarter said they need more money. That's kind of phenomenal. Like when you look at some of the other, like this year compared to last year changes, very few of them were that big. So that's another like reminder to me that Act 76 really did do something, has already done something. And then these places here, continue current funding, more eligibility for families, right? Those are both reflecting this uncertainty around Act 76, which isn't fully implemented. And then also last year, the very last bar here, higher tuition and higher CCFAP, right? It wasn't that many people. It was like, what is that, 15%? But right, people didn't mention that. They said they just want more of people to be eligible. And they want sort of to continue the system that's in place. So hopefully that's helpful. That is the last data slide. I am happy to have some discussion. I also have some thoughts on trends I can share. So I'm gonna stop sharing so I can read the chat, and I'm gonna look at what's in the chat, and feel free to jump in with questions if we have any time at all left. Sorry, Sherry.
Yes, no, so Erin, the questions were around desired versus enrolled capacity, and did that involve, like, did staffing levels impact that, or was it just a lack of enrollment? Like they wish,
yeah.
like they want to enroll more but don't have staff, or is it that they want to enroll more, they have staff, but people aren't enrolling?
Yeah, that is a great question. I can't speak to what was in each person's mind when they did the survey, but I will say that we asked the enrollment question first, like well before we got to the staffing questions. So I think there's some possibility that a few people, like that one that I mentioned that was an outlier that seemed like they wanted 20 preschoolers in their family childcare. They might have been talking about staffing or like making some big investment. I think most people were talking about their current situation and what that was. I don't think they were aspirational, desired enrollment.
The other question, and Dawn answered some of this in the chat, but did you have any additional understanding why so few family childcare homes participated in the retention bonus program? Were there any comments about that?
Well, I will say some of these family childcares were new programs, right? And so they may not have been able to participate. I did not investigate that any further than that. I can take a look and see if I can make any distinction, but we didn't always get like super detailed information about who the program was or anything, so I might not be able to.
So a new question just popped in, and we saw that some programs added health insurance. Do you have any, well, you probably do have the data on how many programs now offer health insurance? I mean, you do on those you surveyed, the percent you surveyed, right? But we don't have.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a total, and right, with this is 10% of regulated programs that responded to this survey. I I think it's a useful survey, but I wouldn't want to make, I wouldn't want to just like multiply by 10. Right. People that have made investments are maybe more likely to do a survey like this. And so I wouldn't want to make assumptions.
I will say we have heard programs talk more about and begin to implement retirement accounts, which never used to happen before for their staff. So that's a positive trend as well. Hopefully we see that continue to grow.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
I just
Any
wanted to quickly add,
Oh.
because I remembered, in regards to the workforce retention, because they were grants, they were also reimbursement basis. So this is just a stipulation, but it may have been more challenging for family childcare centers to give evidence that they had given themselves a bonus in order to have it reimbursed. Grants are a terrible way to run a program like that. So we've taken many of those lessons as we're starting to think about future programs. But yeah, that was a design before me, but I can certainly, on behalf of the state, that was a terrible design. So it was just a more challenging program. So I'm sorry, I interrupted someone.
No, it's just me, Don. Let's Grow Kids also did outreach to try to increase participation. I think there were some things around concern about their benefits cliff and those types of things also. So if there aren't any more questions about this, Erin, you have like 7 minutes to tell us what's coming.
Oh, awesome. All right. I thought I really was out of time. Okay. So I want to just, well, I'll skip those trends. Let me just say that we are gearing up for more programming around starting up new childcares and planning for new childcares, helping to sort of plan for these childcare businesses and kind of investing in their leadership. And so in June, we're doing a startup boot camp for people who might be thinking that they would like to start a childcare, particularly family childcares. Rose Morrison, who's here, it will be leading that boot camp. It's on 2 sessions in June, and she could give you more information. We're also in September, we're gonna, we will start a planning grant program available for anybody that's interested in capital construction, like planning for capital construction projects to build childcare facilities, and a business planning cohort, 2 of them simultaneously in the fall. They're 6 months long. There's a financial stipend available to anyone who participates. They'll be capped at 15. They'll create a business plan and they will create 3-year financial projections as part of that 6-month cohort. They'll also get introduced to some funders, as well as some other sorts of experts in the field. More to come on that, but that should be starting up in like late August, September. Yes. And also later in the fall, there'll be some community engagement projects starting up. So stay tuned for that too. I guess if I have one more moment, I will say that the other things that we are looking into developing as products or services in Vermont are some trainings or coaching around sort of staffing and optimal staffing, optimal enrollment, right? Like getting to kind of a better balance of that, as well as compensation and benefits for staff. And we're doing more work around things like tuition setting, discounts, scholarships, pricing, and revenue projections in the coming year, because we feel like that is something that that there's just a lot of interest and a lot of confusion around like what the optimal approach to those things are. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Erin. I wanted to ask Dan, who's here from VCLF, and they've been a great partner with Let's Grow Kids and First Children's Finance on some tricky projects that expand childcare in some really high need areas. And Dan, I didn't know if you wanted to share anything about some of the experiences or trends that you see at VCLF.
Well, first I wanted to thank Aaron for the excellent report here. This mirrors a lot of what we're seeing. And I will say the major trends that have emerged are we're seeing larger programs try to expand capacity. And when I say larger programs, I'm talking like 100 child programs trying to expand beyond that. And the other trend is seeing mid-sized programs trying to just add a little bit of capacity. And what we're seeing is there's not a lot of cost difference in terms of trying to expand a building or get a new building between going from a much larger program to an even larger program versus just trying to add even like a dozen spots. It can take a fair amount of dollars to make those deals work. And if that's what it takes to add capacity, so be it, to be clear. But it is interesting to see, and I think there's going to be a vital role for grants to play because debt can only carry so much of these projects, and I'm a debt guy saying that. And so that's something that needs to be seen is how can we expand facilities and try to keep solving for staffing. I will say we look at programs competing with each other, not in terms of filling spots, but finding qualified staff. That's where there is competition. It'll be interesting to see with the increase in subsidy of programs that are better able to tap into these increased subsidy rates, have an advantage in trying to hire staff versus programs that are less reliant on subsidy. And we'll just have to see how that develops. I don't have a good answer yet, but thank you very much for all this data.
Thank you, Dan. Awesome. I just wanted to make sure that Rose saw Becca asking for something she might post on social media about the boot camp. It's a great opportunity. Becca has a huge following, so just wanted to make sure First Children's Finance saw that. All right. Well, thank you, Aaron, for the great presentation. We will share, I promised to share all the slides, Aaron, even the trend one we didn't get to, because I think people are curious about what might have been on that. So we will share those with the notes. And I think at this point, we're moving to childcare trends, Anna, to lead the next 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, we'll hand it over to Kate and Sage.
All right, hi everyone. Sorry for joining late. Coming from another call, Sage and I both are. Let me pull up my slides. Okay, can everyone see this? All right, so sorry, be looking over here. My notes are over here. So thank you everyone again for letting us join this meeting. It's good to see everyone again. We were really grateful to be able to join you all back in March to hear some great feedback on our provider focus group protocol. So we have about 25 minutes to talk with you all today. So as a very quick recap before we jump in, this is Sage and I both work at Child Trends, and we're part of a research partnership that's a 3-year project partnering between Child Trends, which is a nonprofit research organization, Building Bright Futures, and then Vermont's Child Development Division. And the purpose of the project is really to evaluate how these recent policy changes to CCFAP have impacted equitable access to childcare across Vermont. So we're going to be looking at administrative data from childcare programs, conducting surveys and focus groups with parents and childcare providers to learn more about their experiences and the impact of these policy changes. Our work is going to have a focus on providers and families in rural areas, families that are recent immigrants, families with infants and toddlers, as well as, families that really reflect the diversity of Vermont and providers as well. And through surveys and focus groups with parents and providers, we're going to learn about how the policies were implemented, as well as how and to what extent these policies have influenced access to high quality care for families who participate in CCFAP. Our hope is that our project over the next few years will really be informed by feedback from both families and providers, like through this committee, and then we also joined the Families and Communities Committee last week and then in March as well. And we plan to use the great feedback, and we already have been to sort of shape every aspect of our work. So thank you again for making time for us today. And I'm going to hand it over to Sage to walk us through a few slides.
Awesome. So as Kate said, we have 25 minutes, so I'm just going to quick go through kind of what we plan to talk about. First, we plan to give an update on the focus groups and the protocols that we received awesome feedback from you guys, which was super helpful. Then I'll give just a little bit, or excuse me, then we'll give a little bit of an overview of the current ideas for recruitment. So bringing on providers and families to participate and how we will be reaching them. And then we'll give the floor to you guys to sort of give us feedback around that and sort of let us pick your brains a little bit. And then we can talk about next steps, which is mostly just homework, cleaning, house cleaning, words. Anyways, so just to like recap about the focus groups themselves, we plan to do 5 with up to 40 providers this summer, kind of planning for the July and August time period. And we're hoping to talk to just like a super wide range of providers all across the state of Vermont, involved in universal pre-K, center-based care, family-based care, and just kind of getting a good diverse sample of all the providers. And we do plan to do both in-person and virtual groups, kind of according to what's most accessible for folks, and what people are able to do and more interested in. Each focus group will be 60 to 90 minutes, and participants do receive $50 gift cards as incentives for letting us learn from them.
All right. So these are just a few on this example or on this slide. These are just a few examples of feedback and adjustments that we made to our protocols based on the feedback that we heard from you all in March. So we just wanted to sort of circle back about that and let you all know how we sort of updated things based on what we heard. So we heard that we have a lot of questions to cover. So we actually extended the amount of time to 90 minutes, and we're also going to send everyone the questions in advance so they can kind of jot down thoughts. We'll also use what's called a Jamboard, which if folks are familiar is just a virtual platform where people can be putting sticky notes on. So as we'll have a Jamboard for each question. So if they didn't get to share something during the group, they can put their ideas on there, and they can even do that after the focus group if they think of something later. We also gave some great feedback in the discussion about moving some of the questions that we had to the screener survey. So we did do that to sort of, again, free up, make the protocol a little bit shorter and free up space for some of the topics that we really want to focus on. We streamlined a few questions, combined a few things to reduce a few redundancies that folks pointed out. We made sure to add definitions of terms that folks may not be familiar with, just so that everyone's on the same page. So things like somebody pointed out the readiness payment program might be called different things. So we made sure to define that and make sure it's very clear that everyone's talking about the same thing. We also, one of the things that we heard from you all is that it would be good to hear how and in what ways the readiness payment program funds supported high quality practices. So asking providers to share some examples of how they use those funds to support their high quality practices in their center or in their program. And we also added really important information to the intro language and the closing language to make sure that providers are clear on how we're going to use this information, and then when and how we'll be sharing back what we're learning with them so that they can stay in the loop and stay involved, and lots more. These are just some examples. All right. So before we dive into the discussion, we wanted to quickly recap sort of our current thinking and our current plans for recruitment for these focus groups. So our team has started developing our plans, and we've submitted an IRB application, which is an institutional review board for research. So they're sort of reviewing our current thinking, and we can make updates as we go based on what we hear from all of you. We have developed, as we mentioned on our last call, a very short screener survey. It's about 15 questions long. It will take all multiple choice. It should take less than 5 minutes to complete. Folks can complete it online via a phone, a tablet, or a computer. And in this screener survey, we're going to be asking providers for their contact information, their demographic information, like race, ethnicity, gender, etc., information about their program, including their program type, program size, the ages served, whether or not they participate in CCFAP, and then some questions about their preferences for focus group logistics, like would you prefer to attend in person or virtually? What time of day works best for you, etc. We have created a flyer that has a QR code that will link to this screener survey. So, and our hope is that we would like to get this flyer out, both an actual paper copy and via email, via social media, etc., to as many providers as we possibly can. let them know about this opportunity to participate in a focus group. And then if they're interested, they can scan the code and complete the short screener survey, which will help us determine whether or not they're eligible, et cetera. We already have had conversations with BBF and we'll continue to discuss with CDD about distributing the flyer and the information about these groups to providers in their networks that they're connected to. We also had a great conversation with the folks over at AOE. They're going to send the flyers to their community-based UPK providers to advertise at those programs as well to make sure that their perspective is incorporated. And during our discussion on for the rest of our time, we would love to hear your feedback on ways that we can make sure that this flyer and this opportunity to participate in these groups reaches as many providers as possible. Oh, sorry. So let's see, one more thing I wanted to say here. Yeah, so once we'll sort of use the screener survey and the flyer in May, once we get approval from our IRB, and then June to really recruit folks to these focus groups. And then we'll use those responses in two ways. One, we'll use it to determine which providers are or are not eligible to participate in the focus groups. And then two, we'll use it to create a sample of 40 providers to participate in our groups that reflect the diversity of ECE providers in Vermont, including racial and ethnic diversity, program type, geographic diversity, ages of children served, and more. We'll also use data from the screener survey to, as Sage mentioned, solidify our focus group logistics. So to determine how many groups to do virtually versus in person, days of the week to hold them on, and times, etc. Once we've identified our sample of 40 providers, we will then email everyone who completed the screener survey to let them know whether they were selected or are included in the sample and more information there. And if they weren't, let them know other opportunities in the future, like at upcoming surveys where they might have a chance to still provide their input in the future. So now we are going to open it up, all of you, and open it up for discussion. We'd love to hear, these are some discussion prompts on the screen, but really we're just hoping to hear from all of you what ideas you have for how we could best recruit providers to these groups, making sure that that group of providers that we select is reflective of Vermont's diversity of providers. What should we be thinking about or considering? Where are places, ideas that you have to advertise or share the flyer, etc. So I think if folks feel comfortable, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. We'd love to just open it up to all of you to hear any feedback you have on recruitment ideas. And I can't really see people, so please, I can only see like 3 people. So just come on off mute if you're raising your hand. Unfortunately, I can't see.
Hey, this is Becca. Sorry, my camera's not on. I'm inhaling lunch between meetings. I would say that one of the things we do really well in Vermont is that even though we feel really isolated, we are really connected. So getting it out through AOE or I host a monthly UPK coordinators meeting. So that would hit your UPK coordinators. And then I think the importance of sending it out through, I'm so going to murder the name, the old starting points networks, the early childhood networks that BBF and BASIC can give you the contacts info for. And then the CDD list that Don had mentioned earlier, things were posted on is the bomb. Like that's where I find out a lot of stuff that goes directly to providers. And you can always send it to me and I'll post it on our Let's Talk Vermont Facebook page.
Wonderful. Those are all great ideas. We will certainly send, once we get approval, we will definitely send the flyer to this group. So you can feel free to share it with any listservs that you're on. And we would be so grateful if you would be willing to do that. Any other questions or thoughts about recruitment that folks have?
I think that early childhood educators prefer virtual.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's more, I just feel it's more accessible for them. But I don't disagree that having both options would also provide opportunity.
That's helpful, yeah. Oh, great. And I see Becca agreeing with virtual and saying that midday one-ish seems to be a good time if you give folks notice. I'm guessing, just from my own personal experience and my own children, rest time is an easy time, nap time. I wish my kids would stop napping. They're 5, and that just means they go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. But rest time is a great time of day to catch people.
Yeah, we often offer like exactly sometime between 1 and 3, and then sometime like around 6 or 6:30 at night for those that really can't free themselves up during the day.
Yep.
Yeah, we've had a number of family childcare say 6:30 is far better for us than the midday. So, you know, the population that you want to capture may be
Yep.
much more interested in a later evening. Well, one of the populations you want to capture, it may be much more responsive to a later evening opportunity.
Perfect. That's super helpful. Can pose a question that came up that our team has been thinking about. We're wondering for providers, you know, to what extent, and I think someone may have mentioned this when we were on the call in March, but to what extent we should really kind of group providers by provider type. So holding a group specifically for FCC providers, holding a group specifically for community-based UPK providers, specifically for community-based center-based providers. How do people feel about that versus sort of just offering them, making all of the groups available to anyone, and then just sort of having a mix of all providers in all of the groups? We'll certainly have the same questions, but you know, I do feel like we heard this in the last group, and I think this is very valid. You know, there could be certainly obviously there are very specific nuances to an FCC provider's experience that we could probe more on, maybe more in depth if we had them all together in one group. Not that we couldn't probe on those unique experiences in a larger group, but I'm curious if anyone has thoughts about that.
I prefer cross settings. And I think if you have opportunities, like you're having 3 different, I don't know how you're thinking about it, but if someone has 3 different timeframes to choose from to participate without it being segmented, that could help. I do prefer across settings. They all provide important service, no matter the setting. I think there's a lot to learn. I think obviously you're very experienced in this. Just the strategies around making sure everyone has opportunity to share and answer questions.
And I guess my question is, are there data points that you're specifically trying to drill down to that are more likely to occur with family childcare and or center-based childcare? Because I think that would factor into my design as to what the groups might look like. Sometimes, you know, you're looking for very specific, let's say, parent of infant toddler responses. So you're going to be focusing on that one group and sort of cherry pick from your various groups. But if the questions are such that really anybody working with young children in any setting, then I would say Sherry's, you know, preference for mixed groups is fine. I'm sure your IRB is looking. I hated IRB process. Especially because, you know, while you're working with parents, I was always working with young children. So I had to prove I wasn't going to, you know.
That's tough. Yes.
Vivisection. It just, yeah. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, what is it that you're trying to target? But
yeah, that's a great question. And very briefly, I can share, you know, I think what we're most interested in learning about is sort of how these CCFAP policy changes have impacted providers in a variety of ways that we feel like certainly it might have impacted providers, FCC providers, UPK providers, center-based providers differently, but the questions are very similar. So we're interested in like how the impacts have maybe been different, but we could really capture that in a mixed group or in groups that has just FCC providers. Like I think we feel confident that we'll certainly still be able to hear those differences and maybe better be able to hear those differences in a mixed group setting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Any other ideas on like places we should be focusing, making, like listservs that we need to make sure we send the flyer to not miss a certain group of providers or places that would be great to recruit?
I think Becca said this, but I don't think there's anyone from, usually there is from Vermont AOIC here today. I mean, they're definitely, you're a place that could help get the word out. We find that a lot do use social media, and there's particular sites that have a lot of engagement, and some of them on here have already volunteered to get the word out.
I'm not sure if Amelia's still on, but I'm wondering if it can go up on the Northern Lights page as well, although it's not a PD opportunity. They do have a fairly large following of Vermont providers across every setting.
Kate, if you have social assets along with the flyer, we can for sure share in our social channels over at Seed.
That's great. We developed email language to go out with the flyer. We didn't develop, but I guess like a flyer could be used like on Instagram, for example, just with I don't actually know what QR codes. You couldn't do a QR code on an Instagram post, but like if we could link it to the survey, right? So I think
we could do a link to the survey in stories. Yeah, and then if you just have any like graphics you have, the social media team that can whip something up.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
You know, I might have missed this. What is the timing that you're hoping to have the focus groups gathered by?
Yes, good question. So we are hoping to recruit. We'll plan on starting recruitment as soon as we get IRB approval, which could be as soon as next week, or they may have questions. So we'll recruit in May and June. And then our plan is to conduct these in July and August.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah, I think Vermont AOIC will be a good contact. I know they're doing an event for family childcare in June. So there's an opportunity for them to have flyers or let family childcare providers know about it then as well.
Any other ideas or thoughts or questions? Paige and I will put our emails in the chat too, so please feel free to reach out to us if you have other ideas. And then as soon as we'll sort of go through Anna to communicate with you all once we get IRB approval to disseminate the flyer and whatnot. So I think once we send that out, if you have questions or want to talk through anything specific, we would be happy to hop on a call with you or whatnot. So
is there compensation for participating? Or
yes,
stipend? Yeah.
Okay. Everyone who participates will get a $50 e-gift card. Yep. Okay, so looking at the time, I think we just have a couple more minutes, so I will move us ahead. We now, we did this at the last meeting, but for anyone who's a childcare provider who's on this call, and is eligible to receive a stipend, we'd love to send you a gift card to thank you for just letting us come to this meeting and for sharing your ideas. And also, we know many of you have already volunteered to sort of help us distribute this flyer and whatnot. So we are very grateful for all of that. So please complete this very short form. I'm putting the link to it in the chat. I might have to stop. I'll have to stop sharing my screen in a second to do it. But it's just going to ask you your email address and where you would prefer to get a gift card from. And then, yes, we are just waiting for our IRB to review, and they probably will have, thank you, Sage. Sage just put it in the chat. We'll put it in, or they may have questions for us. We may have to resubmit, we'll see. But we're hoping to begin recruiting towards the end of May. And then we'll, as we mentioned, we'll begin conducting groups in July and August. So we look forward to being able to come back to this group, hopefully later this summer, to share some early learnings and let you all know what we're hearing. And again, thank you for your time, and please don't forget to complete that short form that Sage put in the chat, and we'll send out gift cards to folks next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll put our emails in the chat too.
All right. I think our next, Anna, I think you're up.
Thanks, Sherry, and thank you all. That was great. You've been looking at several series of lovely slides, and I'm just going to be talking to you about policy recommendations. I should have prepared something, but appreciate this little bit of time at the end of our meeting to start. This is a very kind of first formal conversation that this committee has had this year about policy recommendations. As Sherry mentioned, we've kind of set aside an additional meeting at the end of June to really continue this conversation, and we hope many of you will be able to join us in that. But really just kind of want to start to lay the groundwork together here this morning. So I'm briefly going to describe and kind of reorient people to Building Bright Futures policy recommendation process, and share some things that we think about in terms of how to prioritize and weigh different priorities as we kind of think about developing potential policy recommendations. And then I'm really going to turn it to all of you to kind of do some brainstorming and reflecting on what the committee has heard and what has been elevated at this table and others as potential priorities over the course of the year. So first, to just kind of ground us, annually, the State Advisory Council endorses a series of policy recommendations. These recommendations are really are developed out of the network priorities that we've heard throughout the course of the year. Those are things that come up at this table, at other VCAP committees, at regional councils, at the State Advisory Council itself, but also kind of in all of the monitoring work that the Building Bright Futures team is doing throughout the course of the year, and all of the kind of meetings that we are having with partners. They are vetted by VCAP committees and other partners, and we also kind of go through our own process to ensure that we feel that they are aligned with best practices, and are really data driven. And that process really begins this time of year. It begins in the late spring, and over the course of the summer, we are working to develop drafts that are vetted and reviewed. And we first present a draft of the policy recommendations to the State Advisory Council, who is charged with kind of reviewing and endorsing them in September. And give folks about a month to provide feedback, and push for a formal endorsement in October at the State Advisory Council. Some of the things that I think make the policy recommendations strong is that, particularly in the past few years, we've really kind of tried to ensure that they feel specific and actionable. And are less about kind of a vague priority or something that we know is a challenge, and rather really calling for a specific investment or action, either by the legislature or administration or another party in some cases. And to that end, we really try to make sure that a priority has kind of political and collaborative will that is in place in order to elevate it. We also kind of think about the level of urgency that an issue has when we elevate it. That in recent years, folks might recall that we've kind of pivoted to ensuring that things like the housing crisis are present in our recommendations to that end. And we also kind of, as I mentioned, are really centering recommendations that feel actionable and measurable. And finally, I would say we think about whether or not the BBF's endorsement of an issue, or the State Advisory Council, rather, their endorsement of an issue, whether that will help move the needle in some way that feels meaningful, whether or not us kind of lending our support and voice to an issue is of value at this moment. So those are some of the things that we think about, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any about that process before I kind of turn to you all and start some reflections. Okay, I'm not seeing any, but I'm happy to take them as we go. So I'm just going to start our conversation by asking folks to think about kind of what challenges or barriers that have been elevated at ELD feel particularly resonant at this moment. And then kind of my secondary question that I would ask folks to kind of hold at the same time, because it's a priority for the process, as I mentioned, is, are there kind of specific data-driven strategies or promising practices that ELD's voice could lend support to? So both challenges and barriers, but is there something related to that challenge or barrier that you feel additional investment is needed in, or additional support is required in some way? So I'm gonna pause myself there. What is not working and what do we need to make it work better? Said much more simply.
And Anna, just to be clear, I mean, this is broad, right? This is beyond just childcare, right? Like this is for, are you thinking like the broad specter of things that families with young children need to be successful?
Great question, Bev. I would say for the purposes of our conversation this morning, I would love if we could kind of focus on the charge of this committee related to early learning and development. So mostly related to kind of to early learning, but that being said, like there are other kind of priorities that this committee has that intersect with that, things like CIS and mental health in our early ed programs. And does that help?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And I'm thinking what might have been, when we planned the meeting, what might have been helpful is like a little review of sort of what we've talked about in the last year, to sort of help people be thinking about some of those things. So if we think back across some of the months that we've had discussions about and presentations about, we've had things related to early MTSS. We just had the Business and Technical Assistance Program presentation. We've had Vermont AYC presentation around the Sparks program and some workforce. We've had a universal pre-K panel discussion that was here. These are the things that I'm thinking off the top of my head that we have focused on over the past few months, and just, trying to think about, you know, when I think about what's working, I think about what we just heard from First Children's Finance and some of the work that they're doing and how they partner with VCLF together to do some of the work to increase capacity. And that is something that's working, and is that, you know, that was originally funded, I believe, by federal dollars, ARPA dollars. So there may be some advocacy to do around making sure that program is accessible, continue to be accessible, so families, so we expand capacity and families have access to childcare. So not everything is, like you said, Anna, not everything we have to think about is in crisis, but sometimes it's like, well, actually, this is working well, or this is working well and we need to expand it, is some of the other things to think about.
You know, listening, I'm not a regular part of this group, and I was listening today because the agenda seemed really interesting and Matt couldn't make the whole meeting. So I'm always glad for time for all of you and to get re-grounded in what this circle is speaking about and what matters to all of you. One of the things I feel like I heard today was the need for, from Erin's presentation, was the need for some funding and investment for childcare programs that want to upgrade their spaces or need to make repairs, and not just capital money for new programs. So I throw that out for consideration.
I'd also say, you know, I think, and again, from Erin's presentation, stability and improvement of wages and benefits for our childcare workforce, that seems to be driving a lot of anxiety, and then ties into whether or not they can increase capacity or open that room again, because the ability to keep or just attract and retain staff is in the minds of every program that we have, regardless of type of program in Vermont. And I know, I'm sorry, I know that like readiness payments were helping a lot of that anecdotally when people would come back and talk about it to us, but that money, you know, a lot of them were also expressing worry that once that money stopped in March, would they be able to sustain those rate or wage increases that they had put into effect.
Thank you, Cynthia, for your comment. That's really helpful to hear.
I see Cynthia's on this call. I don't want to call her out, but one of the other things I think about is a little bit the working connection about nutrition in childcare programs. And if there, I'm not an expert in this area, but I feel like there is maybe some work to be done about making universal school meals eligible in childcare programs and or other funding that might be available for food and nutrition programs and childcare programs. I'm not steeped in that right now, but I feel like there may be something around that, and I'm curious what this group thinks about that.
Bev, I'll just jump in and say thanks for the shout out. And it's always a little bit of a push pull. We typically do sort of approach nutrition through the health, so through the COAT committee, but I do think there's definitely overlap, and I think the overlap is in the business model and is in the financing of the childcare as a business that could potentially incorporate nutrition services. Nutrition services are really hard to get off the ground, and there's everything from the appropriate dishwashing that has sanitizing to what those septic systems need to what, you know, storage, dry storage, appropriate freezer space, etc. So we're doing some pilot programs that we hope will inform and ask probably through the COAT committee, But I do think that there's overlap with this group just in terms of the financing and the business piece of early childhood. Thanks for asking.
And I think one of the things that we probably want to put on our list to think about is we heard, I don't know if it was at this group though, but Vermont AYC, who wasn't able to have anyone here today, has submitted an application to the Office of Professional Recognition to advance early childhood education as a recognized profession in Vermont. And so that is, the next step of that is if that's, OPR will make their recommendation to the legislature. So I think there's some opportunity to have discussion as an ELD group on, sort of considering what the recommendation may be from ELD in that situation, if dependent on the OPR application decision.
Thanks, Sherry. That's a great flag. And one of my questions for this group, my only other question that I wanted to tackle this morning was kind of what additional resources, information, or partners do we want to make sure we have for the policy recommendation conversation in late June. So I think it'll be important to have Sharon or someone from her team there to represent that work. Some of the other things that are on my radar that I'm curious if folks have thoughts on are kind of, where things are with the pre-K implementation committee, if we feel as though it's important to consider some type of recommendation related to pre-K and what that might look like for this group to consider. And then secondly, whether or not we feel like we have enough information with Act 76 implementation about, any tweaks or additional investments that are needed that we've learned through implementing Act 76. So like, for instance, like does your team, Dawn, feel as though you have sufficient resources to do really good communication and outreach around this upcoming launch to expand eligibility for folks who are not documented? Like that is a piece that like feels really front of mind to me. So just throwing out a couple of other things that I think have been involved in a lot of the conversations we have had this year that haven't necessarily come up yet.
Also, Anna, like the child trends information around what they're learning about CCFAP. Like, I think over the next few months, we'll have additional information. I want to back up. So Anna, there are a few things in the chat, and I will say that the higher ed institutions and their ability to continue offering early childhood education as a career path is something we should be paying attention to. I mean, we've already lost some of those programs and some seem fragile.
Yeah, I'll just add that nationwide, early childhood bachelors are fading, mostly due to self-selection out of people who may have wanted to choose early childhood, but are worried about the feasibility of their career choices. So I think anything we can do as Vermont to sort of elevate the fact that if we want a well-educated workforce, we have to keep, I speak as I put my professor hat on and now I'm going to take it off. But yeah, that's been a worry of all early childhood majors. So yeah, I concur, Becca.
One of the things that I feel like we're hearing a lot about, and with you know, throughout applications for the Vermont Early Childhood Fund is social emotional supports. And I know that a lot of what our approach has been around training, but, you know, I'm also thinking outside of that, is it, you know, thinking about what the workforce outside of educators like paras and SLPs looks like. And again, sort of from a more holistic place, how are we thinking about what social emotional support looks like and what workforce support looks like? Just trying to sort of broaden the conversation. We really tried last year. I remember there was a lot of talk about what social emotional supports looked like. And we ended up not being able to land in a place where we could put something forward. And I think that, you know, I just look to this group to think about sort of, again, the more comprehensive creative solutions to be presenting to have that broader support.
Thanks, Amelia and Dawn and Lori, who are all putting information in the chat.
Yes, thank you all. I'm capturing it in our notes to the best of my ability. And Lori, just want to kind of call out your first comment around monitoring the impact of Act 76 to ensure that it's, you know, achieving its goals is a really wonderful point. And it's actually something that Building Bright Futures is charged as serving the role of doing in Act 76. So it sounds like perhaps it would be good to kind of do an update for this group in the coming months on what that has looked like so far and what we're learning. Because I think that kind of role is more or less filled, and we're waiting to get more data and be able to share it. So we'd love to update you all.
I think something that I actually was going to bring to the other chairs of this committee that we're hearing at Let's Grow Kids daily is accessibility for CCFAP. And I haven't seen what questions Child Trends is asking, but families struggling in lots of different ways to apply, to understand how apply, to get one-to-one support, glitches in how their income is or isn't. And I think that is related to the impact of Act 76 and the investment to expand eligibility and how we're doing that in Vermont. So, and I don't know specifically, Anna, what data or if any BBF has related to that, but I was going to propose a future session, include a panel that's sort of talking about that aspect of eligibility support around the investment.
Totally. Yeah, I think that would be super interesting to pull together, Sherry. And yes, soon we will have more data. I think that I think that the Child Trends focus groups will be particularly valuable to understand, like, in a more qualitative and nuanced sense, like what hurdles our families are actually experiencing when they go to enroll in the program. So I'm really excited about what we're going to learn through that. I think we are going to learn a lot based on how they've written the questions. Okay, any other wish list items that folks want to put out there now? And then we can give people a little bit of time back, but I want to make sure we have kind of considered things. Thanks, Alyssa. I want to make sure we've kind of set the table appropriately for our June conversation, and so that our team can come prepared with more information and ideas about some of these initial thoughts.
So while you're thinking, and throw it in the chat, or after I'm done talking, share that. Just a reminder, we're gonna have our meeting on June 20. We have our June meeting and we have two topics. The AOE team has a report related to early MTSS. And CDD will be giving us a little more information about the state plan, and so maybe some of the initial feedback, and as well as hopefully some learnings from the readiness payment surveys and how those were utilized. So those are on our June agenda. And then we're meeting on June 27th specifically to really start to dig down to develop our policy recommendations. And what will come out of that is a draft that BBF will be working on that we will revisit in August and September. So that's kind of what will be happening. And maybe Anna, with the next, before June 27th, maybe sending out some, just sort of summarizing some of the topics that we've had and some of the meeting minutes around those topics over the last several months to help people kind of think about, we've covered so much on what we want to make sure we consider when we have that meeting in June.
Totally. Will do.
So Bev is announcing the Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance annual meeting is May 28th, 1:30 to 4:40. It's 4:30.
Okay,
it
bad
4:40?
typing. Thank you, 4:30. This is what happens when you try and type quickly.
Thanks, Bev. No, I was like, that's an interesting time to end. Why not?
Well, 10 extra minutes for socialization.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for participating today. And we'll see you next month, and you'll get all our notes and all the slides. And if you think of anything, you can always email us.
Thanks all.